rounded forms. And the hills are quite wonderfully shaped and given by them. These are, of course, in the tradition of Dongyuan with the lumpy tops and so on, but as is done by this great Yuan dynasty artist. This is the next to last section of one of the copies, and you see how the upper edges of the cloud banks are done too repetitively and unnaturally, and somehow I would say reveal the hand of the copyist. And next, here's the last section of this copy, which is a good copy, but and by itself it might fool you. I'm not saying that I get it right all the time. My God, no. I'm not making that claim anywhere in this whole series. I make my mistakes as much as anybody, and a lot of things judgments that I made in old days, now I see as wrong, and so forth. But nobody gets it right all the time. At any rate, well, sometimes one meets up with old, established connoisseurs, Chinese or Japanese, who do make almost such claims, Chinese particularly. Anyway, a really good, skillful handling of matters of seals and calligraphy. And as I say, I'm not convinced that reading seals and calligraphy and judging by them works any better than judging from the painting. In fact, people who use seals and calligraphy and all the standard old Chinese methods of connoisseurship are likely to differ with each other as much as we do. So they can't all be right, so to speak. So in fact, they're no more right than we are. Okay, now, next please. Okay, this is another quite wonderful painting that I've reproduced, I think maybe for the first time, I'm not sure, but at any rate, I put it in my Ming book. I may have published it before, but I don't remember. It's by Wenzheng Ming, artist of the 16th century mainly, titled Living Aloft. Lo Ju Tu, living upstairs, so to speak, dated 1543. Now in the Metropolitan Museum, New York. Yeah, I had it in my Parting at the Shore book. And I will show, along with it, a copy. But let me just speak a bit about the original for a minute. This was the painting done by Wenzheng Ming for a fellow official who had been in official service, and now at the age of 70 or so, he was retiring, coming back to Suzhou, and his ambition was to build a two-story house and live up above, so to speak, above the world, and getting away from the world, the kind of dusty, messy world that he had to be involved in as an official. And Wenzheng Ming did this quite wonderful painting for him to show him what his house was going to be like, and in fact represented him in the house before the house was actually built. I have a section on it here in my Ming book. Lo Ju Tu, Living Aloft, dedicated to a Mr. Liu Lin, who had just left government service at the age of 70 and returned to Suzhou, where he planned to build a two-story house and dwell on the upper floor. Wenzheng Ming suggests, perhaps punningly, that the plan reveals Liu's lofty-mindedness, portrays the house before it in fact was completed, with Liu and a friend seen in the upper story, and adds a poem describing how the windows of the house would open on all 8 sides. The poem ends, while worldly affairs shift and change, the lofty man is centered and at peace. Well, then I went on to analyze this picture compositionally and show how Wenzheng Ming had very effectively brought out a special meaning. That is, he moves the man away from the rest of the world. He bars us from entry to the picture in a lot of ways. Bare trees in the foreground, a river, a bank, a wall, a space, a whole bunch of trees, and then up above all that, surrounded by trees, the man in his house. Okay, quite wonderful. Now let's see what happens with a copy. Here's a copy which I saw in a dealer's place in Hong Kong again. This is a fairly easy case, but I want to put it on just to make certain points. Now we see immediately that it doesn't work as well spatially. And let me say again that Wenzheng Ming is not a painter you think of as wonderfully given to representing three-dimensional forms and space and all of that. That's not what he's known for. And yet, within his style, within his somewhat flattening style, linear in color, within this he does indeed bring out very effectively the spaces in his paintings. And this is true, I think, of good artists of all times. In fact, it's the last thing that Chinese connoisseurs ascribe to them, because they say these artists were not interested in realism or representation or xing si, so your criteria are wrong. I think that's an absolutely wrong argument. Anyway, I've been persuaded for many years, and I'm certainly persuaded now, that good artists are the ones who, among other things, besides all their stylistic, brilliant stylistic innovations and so on, among other things, produce good pictures. And I've been for years saying that we should all have a sign on our study wall saying, "It's a picture, stupid," based on Kennedy's famous, well, anyway, you know that. All right, anyway, now here's what I take to be the forgery. And you see that the trees in the foreground are not set off clearly from what goes behind and so forth. Well, let me show the details which bring this out more clearly. Here is the foreground area of the original, with these two wonderful bare old trees marking the foreground plane, or very close to the foreground plane. And then behind that, a river, and then an earth bank, and a bridge. So you have to go across the bridge, enter the garden through this gateway, which one panel of the door is open, and then you make your way into the further space to get to the house. So you have to really make your way through this painting, and that's the whole point of it. He's not easily reachable, this Mr. Liu. He's isolated himself from the world. By the way, while this is on the screen, look at the wall. This is the way a Chinese wall is made, many of them. It's made by packing clay down into a mold and so on, putting a roof on it to shield it from the weather. But down below, at the bottom of it, flat stones are set into the base of it to strengthen it, because that's where the wear is, where water and wear and people kicking or things, whatever it may be, are going to erode the wall if you don't make it strong. So they set in flat stones this way to strengthen it. And this is very effective, and later I'll talk about this and show an actual example and show a case where this is misunderstood. Wen Zhengming here gets it very right. Now here's the copy, same section of the copy. You see, just to take care of this matter quickly, this artist doesn't understand this way the wall is built, and he doesn't put these stones in, and the wall is simply rather flat. But apart from that, the foreground tree is not completely clearly set off in space. It doesn't push the rest back, this repoussoir effect. And the wall doesn't clearly define a space into which you enter. In other words, the whole thing is somewhat flattened. The next, please. Okay, here is the copy again, the bad one. I don't have good slides except one more of the original, but here's the copy. Okay, and making the same point, the spaciousness of the original, the way you enter one space after another, is somewhat lost here as the artist flattens the whole thing out. The space between the wall and the trees, the space you go through in the garden, is not so clearly rendered. And the trees are treated repetitively and flat. And the trees don't go around the house as they're supposed to. The trees, the wall, and the rest of it, and all these upper trees are flattened. Okay, enough. Now here is a good slide of the original. And here I want to make an important point. The whole point of the picture is how this house is set among trees, and the trees go around it. The further ones are lighter, and the nearer ones darker. And the trees are distinguished by foliage as usual, and by shape and so on. Okay, that works. Now look at the house itself. Very beautifully spacious. The two walls at the right and left going back, and with open windows, like he says in his poem, it's going to be open on all sides. And Mr. Liu is seen with a guest here in the foreground, sitting and talking. Behind them is a table. notice how the legs of the table are shown. So the table actually is quite substantial. It sits on the floor. And then behind them a screen. Over on the right here, here's a servant bringing a little thing of wine on a tray. Behind is some shelving with books and scrolls. If you look closely, I should have a closer detail, but I don't. And as I say, the trees quite beautifully and effectively going around this and setting the whole thing in the middle of foliage, and then the distant mountains. Okay, here now is the copy. The artist doesn't seem quite capable or willing to try to continue the trees around the house. He doesn't do that, and the whole thing then flattens out, and the whole effect of being the building being surrounded by trees is lost. And then the trees themselves are so done so repetitively and flatly with less distinction in ink tone and foliage and so on, so they simply create a sort of flat area across the bottom. And then you look inside the house, the boy has disappeared, the copyist doesn't trouble to paint him in, and then the next I have a detail getting in closer. Here's the house. Well, as you see, everything goes wrong. The table behind the figures doesn't have legs anymore. It doesn't shown as sitting neatly. The roof of the house somehow he muddles it up with ink wash that puddles. That shouldn't be there. The boy has disappeared, as I say, and the shelves with books are wrong. Anyway, it's a pretty good copy, but if you know the original, it's just a great come down, falling off. Okay, enough of that one. That's a pretty clear but interesting example, I think. Now, okay, here we go. Here's a hanging scroll, ink and light colors on silk, that appeared in an auction. I, for years, went to the great auctions that were held in New York twice a year at Sotheby's and Christie's. And I would go all the way to New York, particularly to visit these auction galleries and photograph the important paintings, the ones I was interested in, partly for my own research, partly so I could go back and recommend them to people or people I was advising. There were several people who would ask my opinion about this picture before they bought it. Anyway, it was worth doing for lots of reasons. I still have thousands of slides made from these auctions. Okay, here is one of them. This is a painting that appeared in from an old auction catalog. I don't have the reference. Anyway, river landscape attributed to the Yuan Dynasty artist Sheng Mo. Well, I realized somehow it looked familiar, or the upper part of it especially. It didn't look quite right. It didn't look like Sheng Mo, first of all. He has a distinct style, and this isn't it. But then what is the artist doing? Okay, then, next please. Put beside it, please. This is a painting in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition by Chu Ying, a major 16th century artist. Chu Ying, Suzhou painter, titled Waiting for the Fairy in Autumn, National Palace Museum in Taipei, in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition. Well, the forger, as you see, this is a broad painting. Figures in the foreground in the lower left. They're on their way to a party going on in a house across the way, waiting for the fairy to come back and carry them across. And then beyond that, various landscapes with buildings. Now, if it's a broad painting, and you see the line down the middle, vertical line, which means that it's in two bits of silk, from two different lengths of silk put together, joined together. This is common for painting. Sometimes you have as many as three, and often these can be separated and remounted separately, and somebody gets the left half and somebody else gets the right half. At any rate, what has happened is that our copyist, as you see, has copied the upper part of the right half of this painting, the hills and then the river bank with trees and buildings down below.